Respected Moraji Bhai, Shri K.K. Shah and friends, I am very grateful to the Government of India for having invited me to deliver the Sardar Patel Memorial Lectures this year on Mahatma Gandhi. It is quite appropriate that these lectures, in the memory of one of the greatest sons of modern India, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, should deal with different aspects of Bapu's personality and thought during the Gandhi centenary year. Sardar Patel had worked shoulder to shoulder with Gandhiji during our struggle for freedom and was one of his closest followers and co-workers. Let us therefore remember him with deep gratitude as a distinguished architect of our country while celebrating the centenary of the father of the nation. I regard the centenary as a God-sent opportunity for India and the world because it affords a rare chance to all of us to recollect once again Bapu's basic ideals and philosophy with a view to solving our own existing problems in a spirit of dedication. The UNESCO has appealed to all the nations of the world to organize Gandhi centenary programs in a befitting manner. In our own country, the National Committee has already drawn up an ambitious program of holding exhibitions, erecting memorial pillars, publishing Gandhian literature, intensifying various items of constructive work, and issuing special stamps and coins. Even so, there prevails a general impression in India that we have been gradually forgetting Gandhiji's high ideals and have bypassed his way of life and work. It is therefore our sacred duty to do some critical thinking and introspection during this period with a view to reorienting our policies and programs for national development. Gandhiji was a practical idealist who tried his very best to solve various difficulties and problems in a rational and scientific manner, keeping in constant view certain basic principles which could not be sacrificed even for the liberation of the motherland. Gandhian thought is not based on some fads or utopian fantasies, as is often assumed by the so-called intellectuals in India and abroad. The ideas of the Mahatma, though resting on the foundations of certain eternal truths, are eminently practical and realistic. We shall be overlooking his advice and guidance at great peril to India's vital interests and well-being. During the last 2 decades, our country has doubtless achieved notable results in various sectors of national development, and it would be improper to underestimate and even denounce our own achievements. Nevertheless, the fact remains that we have not been able to solve some of our own basic problems of hunger, poverty, and unemployment. Further, while endeavoring to increase the rate of economic growth and augment production in agriculture and industry, we have not paid adequate attention towards strengthening the ethical standards of our people. Gandhiji always stressed the imperative need for raising the moral stature of human beings while attempting to raise their standards of material living. He repeatedly reminded us that a nation did not become great merely by erecting huge buildings, establishing giant factories, and multiplying wealth for economic prosperity. While all these achievements were important, for upgrading the living standards of the people, a country became really great and worthy of respect only if her citizens imbibed the sterling qualities of the head and the heart, which inspire them to gladly sacrifice their individual good for the larger interests of the nation. When we study Gandhiji's early life, we are surprised to find that he was in several ways a very average person, and in some respects even below the average. As a student, he did not show any outstanding merit or brilliance. As a barrister, he did not make any special mark in India or in South Africa. As a political leader, we recollect how he trembled while trying to sponsor a resolution at one of the sessions of the Indian National Congress. Neither did he possess any special qualities of eloquence in public utterances. And yet, he was able to make a very deep impact on all those who came in close contact with him. Ultimately, he proved to be our liberator from foreign domination, and we remember him with great respect as the father of the nation. The secret of his wide influence essentially lies in his insistence on truth and non-violence and his dedication to a life of sacrifice and service. He captioned his autobiography as the story of my experiments with truth. Even during the freedom struggle, Gandhiji never compromised with the principles of truth and non-violence for achieving temporary gains. He was prepared to sacrifice everything for winning India's independence, but not these fundamental ideals, which to him were much more crucial than even Swaraj for India. In his cottage in Sevagram, Gandhiji always kept before him the following quotation from John Ruskin. I quote, "The essence of lying is in deception, not in words. A lie may be told by silence, by equivocation, by the accent on a syllable, by a glance of the eye attaching a peculiar significance to a sentence. And all these kinds of lies are worse and baser by many degrees than a lie plainly worded." Unquote. This indicates how Bapu was very cautious to avoid untruth of the subtlest kind in his daily life and behavior. Mahatma Gandhi never subscribed to the principle that the end justifies the means. To him, the means were as important as the ends. He emphatically observed, "They say means are after all means. I would say means are after all everything. As the means, so the end. There is no wall of separation between means and end." He compared the means to a seed and the end to a tree and said, "There is just the same inviolable connection between the means and the end as there is between the seed and the tree." Gandhiji stuck to this golden ideal through thick and thin, without worrying about the immediate results. He was convinced that our ultimate progress towards the goal would be in exact proportion to the purity of our means. Aldous Huxley also maintains that no economic reform, however intrinsically desirable, can lead to desirable changes in individuals and the society they constitute unless it is carried through in a desirable context and by desirable methods. In India, we are today faced with numerous problems which demand speedy solutions. In order to secure quick gains, several sections of the people indulge in loot, arson, and violence in the belief that such disruptive activities would create the required impact on the authorities concerned. It is a matter of great regret that in some cases, the authorities do succumb to violent pressures to the detriment of vital national interests. Several armed conflicts in different parts of the world, including Vietnam and West Asia, have proved beyond a shadow of doubt that wars are unable to solve any problem in a lasting manner. Violence creates many more difficulties and complicates matters in a hopeless fashion. Politicians and statesmen the world over are now convinced that national and international conflicts cannot be resolved militarily, and that solutions can be found only by bringing the parties to the conference table. All these experiences have amply vindicated Gandhiji's insistence on the employment of pure methods for the attainment of noble objectives. In my view, the best way to observe the Gandhi centenary would be to recognize the truth of this eternal principle and to follow it with unbending will and determination in all spheres of private and public life. Bapu's faith in truth and non-violence was based on his unshakable belief in God and in the efficacy of prayer. To him, God was truth, and in the last analysis, truth was God, the source of light and life and love. Without unflinching faith in this supreme power, it was not possible for a human being to adhere to truth and non-violence under greatest provocations. That is why Gandhiji had prescribed firm belief in God as an essential requisite for a satyagrahi. It should, however, be borne in mind that belief in God was not an act of blind faith with Gandhiji. In his recorded message to the Americans from London in September 1931, he had stated, quote, "There is an indefinable, mysterious thing that pervades everything. I feel it, though I do not see it. It transcends the senses. I do dimly perceive that whilst everything around me is ever changing, ever dying, there is underlying all that change a living power that is changeless, that holds all together, that creates, dissolves, and recreates. And that is why in the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists. In the midst of darkness, light persists." Unquote. The existence of such a mysterious power and consciousness is now recognized even by the greatest scientists of the modern age. The atomic power perhaps gives but a faint glimpse of the limitless power and energy of the Supreme Soul, which permeates everything from the minutest to the largest. Gandhiji's immovable trust in God enabled him to defy the violent might of the British Empire with utter fearlessness and remarkable confidence. It was this sole power which kept up his crusading spirit to fight ceaselessly and to the successful end. The Gita was his unfailing companion and source of inspiration because it brought home to him the lasting principle that though the body may perish, the soul lives forever. To my mind, it is the erosion of our faith in this divine power which has undermined ethical values in our private and public life. Without reviving these spiritual and moral values, all our efforts to pull the country out of the quagmire of despair, confusion, and corruption would appear to be a futile exercise. Morning and evening prayers had become an integral part of Gandhiji's public life. He did not miss these prayers even while he was in the midst of life and death struggles for India's freedom. To Gandhiji, insistence on truth constituted the root of his ashram life, while prayer was the principal feeder of that root. Bapu regarded prayer as the bath of purification for the spirit of man. because it denoted our cooperation with God and with one another. Gandhiji sincerely believed that not a blade of grass moved without the will of the divine, and prayer was the medium of communication with the supreme power. The present spectacle of violence and chaos in the Western countries, including America and France, amply bears testimony to the naked truth that material affluence alone could not be the basic aim of national or international progress. A recent editorial in the columns of a London weekly, The New Statesman, entitled "Not by Bread Alone," remarks, quote, "There is evidently a hunger in the world for governments which are activated by moral principles, which take decisions not because they are expedient, but because they are right," unquote. Thousands of years ago, the Upanishads declared in unambiguous language that wealth alone could not satiate man. Navitten tarpaniyo manushya. A few centuries back, the English poet Goldsmith had rightly complained that wealth accumulates and man decay. In our own times, Romain Rolland feelingly observes, "The more I have, the less I am." In the course of his foreword to my book entitled Socialism in Indian Planning, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru wrote, quote, "In India, it is important for us to profit by modern technical processes and increase our production both in agriculture and industry. But in doing so, we must not forget that the essential objective to be aimed at is the quality of the individual and the concept of dharma underlying it," unquote. This foreword was written by Pandit Ji only 2 days before his passing away in May 1964. It clearly indicates his great concern for moral and spiritual values in life in this age of science and technology. Bapu's personal life was a shining example of simple living and high thinking. He used to exercise the utmost economy in the use of food, cloth, housing, and stationery, and did not allow even a pencil to be misplaced or lost without being utilized to the fullest extent. He desired us to develop an integrated personality by promoting our physical, emotional, mental, as well as ethical qualities. When asked to give a message during his lonely pilgrimage in Bengal in 1947, Bapu wrote, "My life is my message." Mahatma Gandhi entertained equal respect for all religions and stressed the need for developing Sarva Dharma Samabhav in national life with a view to establishing a secular democracy in India. According to him, secularism did not imply that there was no place for religion in our lives. It only indicated that the state did not patronize a particular religion, but allowed freedom of conscience and the right freely to profess, practice, and propagate all religions. These fundamental rights have been enshrined in our Constitution, and it is our bounden duty to promote inter-religious harmony in India in the right spirit. The Mahatma could no longer be regarded as only an illustrious Indian leader who won political freedom for his country and raised her stature in the Comity of Nations. He is now hailed as a world personality and is respected universally for his lofty ideals of peace and international brotherhood. Gandhiji regarded the world as his family and all men as brothers. He wrought for India's freedom because he sincerely believed that the liberation of India would benefit the whole world. His patriotism was all-embracing and was consistent with the broadest good of humanity at large. He observed, "Our nationalism can be no peril to other nations, inasmuch as we will exploit none, just as we will allow none to exploit us. It is this broad-minded and large-hearted nationalism which Gandhiji preached and practiced throughout his life. To him, no person was a stranger or a foreigner, because in his view, God was the common bond that united all human beings without any distinctions of race, creed, color, or language. The ancient Indian ideal of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam had become an integral part of Bapu's rich and noble personality. Although Gandhiji was, in the best sense of the term, a citizen of the world, his feet were firm on the soil of his own country. According to him, it was impossible for a person to be an internationalist without being a nationalist. Internationalism, observed Gandhiji, is possible only when nationalism becomes a fact. It is not nationalism that is evil, it is the narrowness, selfishness, and exclusiveness which is the bane of modern nations, which is evil, unquote. Bapu was always willing to learn from other countries and imbibe their good qualities, but he was against losing one's own personality in the process. Quote, I do not want my house to be walled in on all sides and my windows to be stuffed. I want the cultures of all the lands to be blown about my house as freely as possible, but I refuse to be blown off my feet by any. The Rig Veda also enjoins, Ano bhadrah kratavo yantu vishwatah. Let noble thoughts come to us from every side. It is this synthesis of broad-mindedness with respect for one's own culture which we require today for developing the country along sound lines. When I met Bapu for the first time in Wardha in 1936, I had expected that he would be a very serious and reserved person by temperament. I was, however, surprised to find that along with his religious and spiritual outlook, he was also a very genial and affectionate person. His unfailing sense of humor kept his environment lively and cheerful. I remember several instances of Gandhiji's sense of humor, which always cheered others without hurting their feelings. In March 1937, Gandhiji was on his way to Madras for attending the session of the All India Hindi Sahitya Sammelan, over which the late Shri Jamnalal Bajaj was to preside. Gandhiji always drew enormous crowds at every station. At that time, the question whether the Congress would accept office in the provinces was agitating the minds of the people in the country. The Grand Trunk Express by which Gandhiji was traveling reached Bezwada in the morning. There was great rush at the station for the Mahatma's darshan. One press correspondent somehow managed to push his way through the surging crowd and perspiring asked Gandhiji abruptly, Bapuji, will the Congress accept office? It is evident that any remark from Gandhiji on that important question would have found wide publicity. Even his silence would have been interpreted significantly by the press. But Gandhiji was very clever at dodging press correspondence. Why are you so anxious about this matter? Asked Gandhiji. Do you want to become a minister? Was Bapu's prompt query with a chuckle of genial humor. The whole crowd laughed, and the poor correspondent had no other option but to quietly and quickly recede into the background. In June 1942, Louis Fisher, the well-known American journalist and writer, came to Sevagram to meet Gandhiji. He traveled from the Wardha railway station in a rickety tonga in sweltering heat. He was naturally ill at ease, and his discomfort was quite visible on the face. As soon as he entered Bapu Kutir, Gandhiji realized his sense of uneasiness and smilingly remarked, "Well, you must have traveled from the railway station in an air-conditioned coach." Fisher was then able to laugh away his discomfort and regain his normal self. One day, an Italian bishop came to Sevagram to pay his respects. Gandhiji was sitting in a corner of his cottage with mud pack on his shaven head owing to intense summer heat. When the bishop wanted to take a snap, Bapu smilingly said, "Why waste your film, father? People will ask you whether Gandhi had broken his skull." The bishop smiled but could not resist the temptation of shooting the Mahatma. I would not like to multiply such stances of Gandhiji's ever-flowing fountain of sparkling wit and cheering humor. It was indeed a tragedy beyond words that Gandhiji's sense of humor was dried up after the vivisection of the country. Bapu, throughout his life, had worked ceaselessly for maintaining the unity of India. The shock of partition was therefore too deep for him to bear. While Gandhiji had a very kind and compassionate heart, he did not hesitate to carry on tireless crusades against injustice both in South Africa and in India. According to him, it was a sin to suffer unjust behavior at the hands of another person or organization. Gandhiji could combine the greatest love with the greatest opposition to wrong. Non-violence of my conception, observed Bapu, is a more active and more real fighting against wickedness than retaliation, whose very nature is to increase wickedness. The term satyagraha was coined by Gandhiji in South Africa in order to distinguish it from passive resistance. While the latter is conceived as a weapon of the weak and does not exclude the use of physical force or violence for the purpose of gaining one's end, satyagraha of Gandhiji's conception is a weapon of the strongest and excludes the use of violence in any shape or form. It implies vindication of truth, not by infliction of suffering on the opponent, but on oneself. Satyagraha literally means holding on to truth. Gandhiji therefore called it the soul force. He used it as his last weapon against injustice after having exhausted all other possibilities of persuasion and conciliation. It is, however, unfortunate that this noble method, which was handled by Gandhiji with rare skill and statesmanship, is now being misused by various sections in India for achieving narrow and selfish ends. Mahatma Gandhi's concept of satyagraha is now being regarded by some Western thinkers as a moral equivalent of war. Recent events in Czechoslovakia, where the people organized unarmed resistance and complete non-cooperation against the invading forces of the Soviet Union, have also highlighted the crucial role which non-violence could play even in facing external aggression. Nonetheless, we should not lose sight of the fact that Gandhiji was not a pacifist. While he was all for peace and avoidance of wars, he preferred armed defense to cowardly surrender. We should not therefore try to create any confusion in the minds of the people about violence and non-violence so far as national defense against foreign aggression is concerned. We must develop our economic and military strength for meeting external dangers from some of our unscrupulous neighbors whose sole purpose is to weaken and disintegrate India. Of course, we should try to organize peace brigades or Shanti Sena within the country in an effective manner in order to curb violence and social conflicts inside the country. If we succeed in maintaining internal peace without the help of the police and the military, we may be in a position to counteract violence from hostile neighbors sometime in the future. There was always a human touch in Bapu's dealings with thousands of social and political workers in different parts of India. It is amazing to find that even ordinary constructive workers had received hundreds of letters from him written in his own hand. Once I requested Bapu in Sevagram to dictate letters to Kanu Gandhi or some other inmate of the ashram in order to save his precious time. He hesitated, but later agreed to try this experiment. There was no question at all of his signing typed letters except those which were very formal. For a few weeks, Gandhiji did dictate some letters to Kanu, who wrote them down in legible hand, and Bapu signed them at the end. After some time, I found that Gandhiji had again started the practice of writing letters in his own hand. I naturally wanted to know why he had stopped dictating letters. He quietly replied, "I do not feel like signing letters written by somebody else. My personal touch is lost, and a worker will not feel satisfied unless he receives the letter in my own handwriting." It was thus through his correspondence in this manner that Bapu could win the hearts of a large number of workers who regarded him as their own father in the real sense of the word. There is one more aspect of Gandhiji's life of which I would like to make a special mention. Bapu took meticulous care of details in his daily work. He would leave nothing to chance and give elaborate instructions to his friends and colleagues even in comparatively minor matters. I vividly remember his writing down a detailed note for me on the occasion of the visit of Lord Lothian to Sevagram sometime in 1938. He instructed me how I should receive the distinguished guest at the main gate of the ashram and first take him to the guest house. I was asked to explain to Lord Lothian that Bapu was observing silence that day, but he would break it for discussing various important matters with him. After a wash and some light refreshments, I was to accompany him to Gandhiji's cottage. A chair was to be kept ready for Lord Lothian. It could, however, be removed if he preferred to squat on the ground while talking to Gandhiji. I was indeed amazed that Bapu could find time to work out all these details in advance and reduce them to writing. Even when important Congress Working Committee meetings were in progress, Gandhiji would not forget to issue careful instructions, often in writing, regarding the nature cure treatment to be given to various patients in the ashram. Thoroughness in these matters was a very notable trait of Bapu's character. He did not tolerate slipshod or indifferent work on the part of his co-workers. The grammar and the idiom used in his own writings were invariably correct, and he did not relish a single printing error in the Harijan. Whenever he wrote on a particular subject, he would study all the facets of the problem before expressing his considered views on it. It was this capacity for thoroughness which enabled Gandhiji to face various complexities with remarkable self-confidence. Gandhiji exercised a spectacular sense of economy in his personal life. He would always use the backside of the letters received by him for writing statements and articles for the Harijan. His small cottage in Sevagram was a drawing room, an office, a lounge, and a conference room all rolled into one. Everybody sat on the floor, which was furnished with ordinary village mats. There was hardly any furniture in his room except a hurricane lantern, a low desk, and a small rack for books. During the summer heat, there was no question of a cooler or air conditioner. He would rarely use even a cuss curtain made by a local artisan. His normal practice was to place a mud pack on his head for keeping the body cool. I recollect one more instance. When Bapu was to go on the Bengal tour in 1945, 2 third-class compartments were reserved for him and his party from Wardha. He found that the two compartments were not necessary. His party could be easily accommodated only in one of them. So he called Sri Pyarelal and asked him to vacate one of the two compartments. But both have been reserved for us, Bapuji. The railway authorities have been already paid, said Pyarelalji. That does not matter at all, Bapu said. We are going to Bengal for the service of the poor and the starving millions. It does not behove us to enjoy comforts on the train. Moreover, don't you observe the suffocating rush in other third-class compartments? No further arguments were necessary. The whole party moved out of one compartment, vacating it for the other passengers. And then alone could Gandhiji relax himself into sound sleep. Gandhiji was frugal even in his words. He used to observe every Monday as the silence day. That gave him some respite from meeting visitors, and he found some time to write his weekly notes and articles for the Harijan. He believed that it was helpful to observe truth in one's life if unnecessary speech was avoided. He once wrote in his diary, "A needless word is also a violation of truth. That is why the practice of truth becomes easier by observing silence." Unquote. Lastly, Gandhiji, instead of finding fault with others for various shortcomings, was constantly looking within himself for the reasons of failure. We do not wish to see our own faults, wrote Bapu, but take delight in perceiving the fault of others. Whenever he detected a shortcoming in one of the inmates of the ashram, instead of rebuking the worker, he would inflict upon himself a fast of self-purification. The best way, therefore, to remember Gandhiji during the centenary period would be not to collect more funds for his physical memorials, but to turn the searchlight inwards and to try to make our own life pure, noble, and sincere. I need hardly say that our public life today is far removed from ethics and spirituality. Till we revive the old values of simplicity, integrity, and transparent sincerity in our individual and public life, we shall be taking Gandhiji's name in vain. I have always been an optimist. Gandhiji regarded pessimism as a morbid attitude towards life. We have to be always forward-looking and march ahead with faith and determination. In the midst of darkness, even a lone candle can bring about some light to the people around. A few such candles can shed more light and hope and cheer. Instead of criticizing others, let us try to kindle our own candle with humility. Let us try to discharge our own responsibilities with sincerity and honesty. We shall then see more light on our path, and the surrounding mists would gradually fade away. Thank you.